I was 58 years old the first time I said it out loud. Not to a therapist, not to a friend, not even to myself in the mirror. I said it to my wife of 31 years while she was washing dishes on a Tuesday night in October. I stood in the kitchen doorway and I said, "Linda, I need to tell you something I should have told you before we ever got married." And she turned off the water, and she looked at me, and I think she already knew. I think she had known for a very long time. But knowing something in the back of your mind and hearing it spoken out loud in your own kitchen are two completely different things. I said, "I'm gay." And the silence that followed those two words was the loudest thing I have ever heard in my life. It was louder than the shouting that came after, louder than the crying, louder than the door closing 3 weeks later when she moved out. That silence in the kitchen, those 3 or 4 seconds where the whole world just stopped, that silence is something I still hear when I close my eyes at night. And I need you to understand something before I go any further. I am not telling you this story because I want sympathy. I am not telling you this story because I think I'm brave. I'm telling you this because there are men watching this right now who are exactly where I was. 60 years old, 65, 70, sitting in a house they built with someone they love but not the way a husband is supposed to love a wife. Going through the motions, smiling at the right times, saying the right things, and dying a little bit every single day. I know you're out there because I was you. For 31 years I was you. Let me go back to the beginning. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of town where everybody goes to the same church and everybody knows everybody's business, and the worst thing you could be was different. My father worked at a factory that made auto parts. My mother was a homemaker. I had 2 brothers and a sister. We were a normal American family in every way that word meant anything in 1962. And I knew I was different before I had any language for what different meant. I was maybe 9 or 10 years old the first time I understood that what I felt when I looked at other boys was not what other boys felt when they looked at other boys. I didn't have a word for it. Nobody talked about it. It wasn't on television. It wasn't in books. It wasn't anywhere in my world. The only time I ever heard anything close to it was when my father used a word I won't repeat here to describe a man who lived alone on the edge of town. And the way he said that word, the disgust in his voice, the way my mother didn't correct him, the way my brothers laughed, that was all the education I needed. Whatever I was feeling, whatever was happening inside me, it was something to be ashamed of. It was something to hide. It was something that would make the people I loved most in the world look at me the way my father looked at that man. So I buried it. I buried it so deep I almost convinced myself it wasn't there. I played football in high school. I went to dances. I dated girls. I did everything a boy in that town was supposed to do. And I was good at it. That's the part people don't understand. They think if you're hiding something that big, it must show. It must leak out somehow. People must suspect. But the truth is, when your survival depends on the performance, you become the greatest actor who ever lived. I wasn't just pretending to be straight, I was straight. I made myself straight through sheer force of will and terror. I laughed at the right jokes. I talked about women the way the other guys talked about women. I picked fights when someone called someone that word. I became the most aggressively normal person you have ever met in your life. And it worked. Nobody suspected anything. Not once. Not ever. And the cost of that performance, the cost of keeping that mask on every minute of every day for decades, I didn't understand what it was doing to me until it was almost too late. I met Linda when I was 26. She was 23. She was beautiful and kind and funny, and she loved me in a way that I had never experienced before. And I loved her too. I need to be very clear about that because people always ask, "Did you love your wife?" Yes, I loved her. I loved her deeply. But I was not in love with her the way she was in love with me, and I knew that from the very beginning. I knew it on our first date. I knew it the night I proposed. I knew it at the altar. I knew it every single day of our marriage. And I married her anyway. Because in 1985, in that town, in that family, with that father, the idea of not getting married, the idea of being a single man at 30, the idea of anyone even beginning to wonder why, that was more terrifying to me than living a lie for the rest of my life. So I chose the lie. And Linda became part of that lie without ever knowing it. And that is the thing I am most ashamed of. Not that I'm gay, I made my peace with that a long time ago. But that I used another person's love, another person's life, another person's best years to build a wall between me and the truth. She deserved better than that. She deserved a husband who wanted her the way she wanted him. And instead she got me, smiling, performing, dying inside. We had 2 children, a daughter and a son. And when they were born, something happened that I did not expect. I felt more trapped, not less. Because now it wasn't just about me and Linda. Now there were 2 little people who called me dad and who depended on me, and who would be devastated if this family fell apart. Every time my daughter hugged me, every time my son said he wanted to be like me when he grew up, I felt the walls closing in tighter. I couldn't leave. I couldn't tell the truth. I couldn't do anything except keep performing, keep smiling, keep pretending. And the weight of that pretending started to show up in my body. I had headaches that lasted for days. I couldn't sleep. I drank too much. Not enough that anyone would call me an alcoholic, but enough that I needed 2 or 3 glasses of whiskey every night just to quiet the noise in my head. I gained weight. I stopped exercising. I stopped caring about things I used to care about. I went to work and I came home and I sat in the garage and I drank, and I waited for the day to be over so I could do it all again tomorrow. And if you had asked me at that time, "Are you depressed?" I would have said no. I would have said, "I'm just tired. I'm just stressed. I'm just getting older." Because I didn't know that what I was experiencing was the slow collapse of a man who has been at war with himself for 30 years. I didn't know that you can't fight your own nature forever without something breaking. The internet changed everything. And I don't mean that in the way you might think. I don't mean I went on a dating site. I don't mean I started watching things I shouldn't have been watching. I mean that for the first time in my life, in my late 40s, I found other people's stories. I found forums where men my age, men in their 50s and 60s, were writing about exactly what I was going through. Men who had been married for decades, men with children and grandchildren, men who had served in the military, men who had been deacons in their churches, men who had lived the exact same performance I had lived. And they were talking about it. Some of them anonymously, some of them with their real names. And reading those stories, sitting alone in my garage at 2 in the morning, reading these men's words on a screen, was the first time in my life I did not feel completely alone. I cried. I sat in that garage and I cried harder than I had cried since I was a child. Because I realized it wasn't just me. There were thousands of us, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands. Men all over this country, all over the world, sitting in garages and bathrooms and parked cars, reading these same words, feeling this same relief, this same terror, this same desperate hope that maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe there was still time to be who we actually were. It took me another 10 years. 10 years from the first time I read those stories to the night I stood in that kitchen doorway. 10 years of going back and forth. 10 years of almost saying it, and then not saying it. 10 years of telling myself, you'll do it after the kids graduate. You'll do it after your mother passes. You'll do it after you retire. Always some reason to wait. Always some excuse to keep the mask on for one more year, one more month, one more day. And then one Tuesday night in October, I don't even know what triggered it. I just couldn't do it anymore. The weight of it was physically crushing me. I felt like I was suffocating in my own house, in my own skin, in my own life. And I walked into that kitchen and I said the words, and the world as I knew it ended. The first thing Linda said after the silence, after the tears, was, "How long?" And I said, "Always." And that word, always, that was the one that broke her. Not the fact that I was gay, the fact that I had always been gay. The fact that our entire marriage, our entire life together, every kiss, every vacation, every Christmas morning, every time she thought we were building something real, I had been somewhere else inside my head. She said, "Was any of it real?" And I said, "All of it was real. I just wasn't." And I don't think I've ever said anything more honest or more painful in my entire life. She moved out 3 weeks later. She went to stay with her sister in Michigan. We didn't speak for 4 months. When she finally called me, she said, "I don't hate you, but I don't think I'll ever understand you." And that was the best I could hope for. I didn't deserve forgiveness. I'm not sure I've even forgiven myself. Telling my children was worse. My daughter was 27 at the time. My son was 24. I sat them down in the living room of the house they'd grown up in, and I told them. My daughter cried. Not because she was disgusted or angry. She cried because she said she felt like she was grieving someone who was still alive. She said, "The dad I thought I knew doesn't exist." And she was right. The dad she thought she knew was a character I had been playing for her entire life. The real me, the actual person underneath all of that. She had never met him. My son was different. He was quiet. He didn't cry. He didn't yell. He just said, "I need some time." And he got up and he left, and he didn't call me for almost a year. That year was the longest of my life. Every holiday without his voice on the phone. Every birthday that went unacknowledged. Father's Day sitting alone in this backyard wondering if my son would ever speak to me again. He did eventually. He called me on a random Wednesday afternoon and said, "Dad, I still love you. I'm just trying to figure out what that looks like now." And that was enough. That was everything. The thing nobody tells you about coming out at 58 is that you don't walk into some beautiful new life that was waiting for you on the other side. You don't suddenly become happy. You don't suddenly feel free. What you feel is lost. Completely, absolutely, terrifyingly lost. Because the structure that held your entire life together, the marriage, the family dinners, the routine, the identity, all of it is gone. And what's left is a 60-year-old man sitting alone in a house that used to be full of people, trying to figure out who he is for the first time. And I mean that literally. I did not know who I was. I didn't know what music I actually liked because I had always listened to what Linda liked. I didn't know what I wanted to eat for dinner because I had always eaten what the family was eating. I didn't know how to spend a Saturday because Saturdays had always been about the kids' activities. I didn't know how to be alone because I had never been alone. I had always been performing for an audience, and now the audience was gone and I was standing on an empty stage with no script and no idea what to say. I tried dating. That was a disaster. I was 59 years old and I had never been on a date with a man. I didn't know the rules. I didn't know the language. I didn't know the apps. I downloaded Grindr because someone on one of those forums told me it was how you meet people. And within the first 5 minutes I understood that I had entered a world I was completely unprepared for. The directness of it, the speed of it, the fact that men would send you pictures of their body parts before they even said hello. I'm not judging anyone. I understand that for men who grew up in gay culture, this is normal. But for me, a man who had spent his entire life in a straight marriage in a small town, it was like landing on another planet. I closed the app after 45 minutes. I sat on my couch and I stared at the wall and I thought, I gave up my entire life for this? That was a dark moment. One of many. But I kept going. I tried other apps. I tried going to a gay bar for the first time in my life at age 59. I sat in the parking lot for 30 minutes before I could make myself walk in. And when I did walk in, I felt like the oldest person in the room by about 3 decades. I ordered a drink. I sat at the bar. Nobody talked to me. I stayed for an hour, finished my drink, and drove home. And that night I cried again because I realized something terrible. I had come out too late. The world I was entering, the gay world, it was a young man's world. It was built for 25-year-olds and 35-year-olds who knew how to move through it because they had been moving through it their whole lives. I was starting from 0 at 60, and the learning curve felt impossible. But here's what I want to tell you, and this is the reason I'm making this video. It got better. Not fast, not easily, not in some dramatic movie-style transformation where the sad old man suddenly starts dancing at a pride parade with a rainbow flag. No, it got better slowly, painfully, one small step at a time. I found a therapist who specialized in late-life coming out. I didn't even know that was a thing, but it is. There are therapists who work specifically with men and women who come out in their 50s and 60s and 70s. And talking to someone who understood what I was going through, who had seen it hundreds of times, who could tell me that what I was feeling was normal and expected and survivable. That changed everything. She told me something in our third session that I have never forgotten. She said, "You are not starting over. You are continuing. Everything you were before, the father, the husband, the worker, the friend, that was all still you. You're not erasing your life, you're completing it." And that reframing, that shift from seeing myself as a man who had wasted 30 years to seeing myself as a man who was finally finishing what he started, that saved me. I found a support group. 6 men, all over 50, all recently out. We met every Thursday night in the back room of a community center. And those men became my lifeline, because they understood things that nobody else in my life could understand. They understood what it felt like to kiss a man for the first time at 62. They understood what it felt like to hold a man's hand in public and feel simultaneously terrified and alive. They understood the guilt, the shame, the grief for the years you lost, the complicated feelings about the wives and children you left behind. They understood all of it because they were living all of it. And for the first time in my life, I was in a room full of people where I didn't have to perform. I didn't have to pretend. I could just sit there and be exactly who I was, and nobody flinched. I eventually met someone. His name is David. He was 63 when we met. He had his own story. Married for 25 years, 3 kids, came out at 55. We met at that Thursday night group. He sat across from me and he told his story, and I felt like I was listening to my own life being read back to me. We went for coffee after the meeting. Then we went for coffee after the next meeting. Then we started going for coffee on days when there was no meeting. And somewhere in those conversations, somewhere between the terrible cafeteria coffee and the fluorescent lights of that community center parking lot, I fell in love for the first time in my life. Not the love I had for Linda, which was real but incomplete. Not the love I had for my children, which was fierce but tinged with guilt. This was the love I had been waiting for since I was 9 years old and didn't have a word for what I was feeling. This was the love that fit. The love that didn't require a performance. The love that let me put the mask down and just breathe. David and I have been together for 11 years now. We live together. We have a dog. We grill in this backyard on weekends. It's not dramatic. It's not glamorous. It's just a life. A real one. The first real one I've ever had. My daughter calls every Sunday. She loves David. My son comes for Thanksgiving. He's still working through things, but he shows up, and that's what matters. Linda remarried 4 years ago. A good man. I'm happy for her. I genuinely am. She deserved someone who could love her the way she needed to be loved, and I hope she has that now. Here's what I want to say to the men watching this who are still where I was. You're 55 or 60 or 67, and you're sitting in your living room right now, and your wife is in the other room, and your kids think everything is fine, and you have this secret that is eating you alive, and you don't know what to do. I want to tell you that I understand. I understand the fear. I understand the guilt. I understand the voice in your head that says, it's too late. You're too old. You've been doing this too long. You can't blow up your life at this age. I had that voice too. That voice kept me trapped for 10 extra years. And I want to tell you that the voice is wrong. It is not too late. It is never too late to be who you are. I'm not going to tell you it's easy. It's the hardest thing you will ever do. You will lose things, real things, important things. You may lose your marriage. You may lose years with your children. You may lose friends who can't handle it. You may lose the version of yourself that the world was comfortable with. And that loss is real and it hurts, and I won't pretend it doesn't. But here's what you gain. You gain yourself. And I know that sounds like something you'd read on a greeting card, but I mean it literally. You gain the actual experience of being alive. Not performing alive. Not going through the motions of alive. Actually being present in your own body, in your own home, in your own relationships, without a mask, without a script, without that constant low-level hum of anxiety that has been your background noise for 40 years. You gain the ability to sit in a chair in your backyard on a Sunday morning with a cup of coffee and feel the sun on your face and not wish you were somewhere else. Not wish you were someone else. You gain peace. And I don't know how to explain what that's worth to a man who has never had it. But I can tell you that I would go through all of it again. The kitchen, the silence, the divorce, the year without my son, the loneliness, the grinder disaster, the parking lot of that bar, all of it. I would do every bit of it again for this. For sitting here right now at 70 years old telling you the truth about who I am and not being afraid. That's what it cost me. And that's what I gained. And if you're out there right now hiding, hurting, pretending, I see you. I was you. And there's a chair here for you whenever you're ready. If this meant something to you, leave a comment. I read every single one. And if you're not ready to comment, that's okay too. Just know that you're not alone. You were never alone. Subscribe if you want to hear more. I've got a lot more to say, and I'm not hiding anymore.